What's going on, YouTube? Happy New Year. I hope you had a great holiday break. Welcome to Tino Talks. Today's topic is going to be on AI. Maybe it'll be on different things moving forward, but really it's just going to be my takes on the AI landscape with regards to software engineering as of January 12th, 2026. So yeah, excited to jump into it. Currently it's named Tino Talks. We'll see where that takes us. Maybe Tino Takes. Not entirely sure. But let's jump right in. So, online discourse really used to be wars on JavaScript frameworks and what the best way to, create a web application was. And since the, acceleration of AI, it's really turned into the AI wars, really just in terms of whether you're pro or anti-AI. And, there's reasons to be on one end of the spectrum or another. But, generally, I am bullish on AI as it pertains to software engineering. And, I really think it's been a productivity boost. It's been fun, quite frankly. I also just think, with new tools and new frameworks, no matter what it is, it could be, learning NeoVim. It could be you're using light mode for the day. You might feel that kind of temporary productivity boost. But I do think with LLMs, we are seeing productivity boosts with software engineering. So yeah, it's an exciting time. And, whether or not you're pro or against AI, because people can be really polarized about this, at the end of the day, write the code that you want to write. If you're in software engineering, or if you're a developer or a software engineer, at some point, I expect you enjoyed programming. You loved like debugging, getting in there and kind of, waiting for that light bulb moment for it to really click. And, I don't want to take that away from anybody, but, there's plenty of code, especially if you do it for a living. There's plenty of code that is, time consuming and quite frankly is more boring to write. So, let the LLMs schlep through that code and read and write it for you while you write the code you want to write. So, whether or not you're pro or against AI, I still think it would be a missed opportunity for you to not kind of see what's on the frontier in software engineering nowadays. I touched on this in my last video a little bit, but we're really seeing a shift from autocomplete to agents. So in the early days of AI-assisted development, Copilot was really the go-to option, and you would be typing something and it would make a suggestion on what it thinks you want to write. And that's still a thing, of course, with Copilot and Cursor as well. Cursor is really good at it, but we're really seeing a shift to agentic workflows where it's really an LLM running in a loop that has access to tools, and it's trying to achieve a goal that you set it out to do. So we're really seeing a shift from that, and also from writing code to more reviewing code, because when you give a task to an agent, then it's going to generate some code, and well, it's on you to review the code, because at the end of the day, we still need humans in the loop to verify the code that's being written in terms of if it is fixing a bug, or if it's completing the feature, or if it implemented your web application or whatever. You still need to be in the loop to verify that what it generated was correct. If there are any Dune fans out there, I saw this on Twitter somewhere, I can't quite remember where, but using agents to generate code can sometimes feel like you're riding the worm. If the worm was the agent and you're just kind of trying to steer and guide it, but sometimes it doesn't generate what you want it to generate, or didn't generate what you expected to. And, you might be flown off the worm, and, you might have to get in there manually and correct things. But, it's also like kind of exhilarating and fun in that way too. So is AI actually making you more productive? The short answer is definitely yes. And, sometimes there can be diminishing returns though, and you kind of have to, look out and catch yourself if you're just continually prompting the agent, hey, do this, do this, do this. And, if it's not working, then you kind of need to, get a hint that you need to get in there and manually do it yourself, or maybe prompt it differently. But at the end of the day, I am seeing productivity gains for myself. Is it 100x? Is it 10x? Probably not. But for me, I'm definitely seeing that productivity boost, and I'm also seeing it keep my burnout and fatigue at bay because, at the end of the day, I'm going to write the code I want to write, but there's, again, plenty of code where I'd prefer not to write, quite frankly. So, when you're in the trenches and you're doing tasks that aren't exactly exciting or that you don't want to do, using or relying on AI agents to write that code for you and then just kind of reviewing the output is really great. It's, for me, I think keeping the fatigue and burnout at bay. So that's a really big positive for me. So as of January 2026, Opus 4.5 isn't exactly the newest model. It's been out for almost a couple months. I think it came out around Thanksgiving of last year in 2025. But my point is that it's a really excellent model for software engineering and for development, coding, whatever you want to call it, vibe coding even. But, I've had a blast using this model and the other Claude models as well. And of course, I'm trying out all the different models. OpenAI has great models with Codex, and, Gemini 3 is also a pretty good model as well. But I've really been leaning personally on Opus 4.5, both, directly through Anthropic, on kind of like my personal side projects through Claude Code and Open Code as well, although that changed a little recently. Yeah, I think it's a great model. I'm also using it at work through Copilot because Copilot offers, different models from different providers, which is a really great benefit if you're using Copilot as your LLM provider. But I bring this up because, at least in Copilot, but in general, Opus 4.5 is a smarter but bigger and more expensive model. So in Copilot, it's considered a premium model, and each premium model has a multiplier in terms of how many credits it's consuming, because whatever plan that you're on, you're going to have a monthly quota of credits that you kind of have to be aware of. Here's a few examples from GitHub's website and what the model's multiplier is. So as you can see, Opus is a 3, Opus 4.1 was a 10. So, Anthropic did a really great job at bringing the cost of this model down while still, improving the benchmarks on it. So, the Sonnet models are 4.5. Haiku 4.5 is only a 0.33. So, again, my point is, let's say you have, 500 credits a month. You can't just hammer Opus 4.5 over and over and over again, because if you do that and you're doing a lot of work, you might end up running out of premium credits, and then you might have to wait until the end of the billing cycle or the end of the month for, you to get more credit. So, you really need to be cognizant about your usage, and, depending on the task, if it's a small task, maybe it's a small refactor or something like that. Maybe you use a smaller model like Sonnet or Haiku, or honestly, even some of the models with 0 multipliers, they're free to use as much as you want. Those are also a good option too. And if you're using Copilot, you can check this in the bottom right-hand corner of VS Code as well if you're using VS Code. But you can also check your usage by going to github.com settings Copilot features and seeing your premium requests there. And, again, you kind of want to keep an eye on it in terms of leaving enough usage for the rest of the billing cycle or the rest of the month. And, roughly each month, business days, so, 4 weeks, 5 days each, 20-ish business days. So, roughly after the first week of the month, I'm thinking, I don't want to be more than around 25% usage, because if I'm much more than that, then I'm not leaving much wiggle room for, the rest of the billing cycle, the rest of the month. So yeah, just something to be aware of. It's interesting how different providers handle usage differently. And so yeah, Copilot has this notion of credits, and if you're using Anthropic and using their Pro or Max plans, you have session limits, which are, I think, 4 to 5 hours long. And then you also have weekly limits as well. So it's similar where, And I think that's it. I don't think they have a monthly usage. It's just the 4-hour and the weekly limit. So, depending on where you're getting your models from, you need to keep an eye on this, because if you're just, hammering the most expensive models over and over and over, and you run out of usage or you run out of credits, then, well, you're kind of shit out of luck. So, again, you want to keep an eye on this. And while we're on this topic, I gave Cursor a shot over, I don't know, when was this? Yeah, early January. And Cursor is a great product. I really liked it as an IDE, and I think it kind of has a nice workflow. It seems like it's using Git work trees pretty well too, or maybe it's not exactly that, but it's effectively that with different agents running different tasks. But I couldn't really tell what my usage was, and when you look at their plans, for instance, for the $60 a month Pro Plus, it just says 3 times the usage on all, OpenAI, Claude, and Gemini models, and then Ultra is 20 times usage. But there was nowhere in the dashboard that I could find, and maybe I'm wrong, but I couldn't find it. As you're doing requests, it comes up in the usage section on your dashboard, and it'll tell you, I guess, how much it costs and whether or not it was included in your monthly subscription. But at some point you hit the max usage, but there's really no way of knowing how close you are to hitting that, which is kind of frustrating. I mean, it was kind of nice in the sense that you didn't have like a 4 to 5 hour window of usage, so you could just, you could develop as hard as you want, hit agents as hard as you wanted, but again, kind of running blind in terms of where or how far I was in my allocated, usage. I didn't love that. So I'm surprised that it isn't more transparent. And yeah, I wish they'd make a change on this so it's easier for users to see. And another thing is, while I was using this, Opus 4.5 came out pretty recently, and they were actually charging it at Sonnet 4.5 rates, which, it was a good deal at the time. But, now if they moved Opus 4.5 back to, its kind of typical price, then, I wouldn't be getting as many agent calls, or I wouldn't be getting as much usage with that particular model as much as I did when I was using it. So again, I think Cursor is a great product, but I really wish they would increase the transparency here for developers to, keep an eye on that, and not totally run up the tab, because you can have on-demand usage, which says, once you go beyond your plan's included usage, then you can essentially continue to use Cursor, but from what I understand, essentially at cost of whatever the model costs. So overall, depending on what tool you're using, what provider you're using, you want to keep an eye on what your usage is. You could just be paying for the model directly, like token-basst pricing directly with the API, with Anthropic or with OpenAI. And honestly, if you're just kind of giving it a shot initially, I would recommend that, especially if it's a side project or something that you're not investing a ton of time in, I wouldn't suggest spending $100 or $200 a month to just try it out, because you might be wasting money. And using the API, token-based pricing also kind of gives you an idea of how expensive the models are. Moving on to Copilot code reviews, this is related to the usage topic we were just talking about. And of course, Cursor has their own review agent, and Claude Code has, a review skill, or even, you can have Claude as a GitHub action review your code when you open a PR or when you push an update to a PR, which is pretty nice. But again, it all like relates to your usage and monitoring your usage, which I feel like most people don't talk about, which is partially why I'm covering it. But for Copilot specifically, each time Copilot reviews a pull request or reviews your code in your IDE, your monthly quota of premium requests is reduced by 1. So yeah, it's just good to know, because again, if you're just constantly hitting review on your Copilot PRs and, using I guess it doesn't matter what model, or even if it's transparent about what model it's using, because it's just reducing it by one regardless. So yeah, it's just something to be aware of. And yeah, this applies to other agents as well. So you just want to keep an eye on your usage and be more strategic about what models you're using and how you're using the models in terms of code reviews as well. Moving on to Copilot instructions. And of course, again, Cursor has Cursor rules. OpenCode has an agents.md file. Claude has a claude.md file. We're kind of all over the place with this. It seems like there hasn't really been a standard that the community has settled on, unfortunately. But if you work on a team, especially, or really if you work by yourself, or if you work on a team, this is important to add to your repositories. And with Copilot, there's even personal level instructions, repository level, organizational level instructions, in order to kind of share these instructions in between, or share these instructions so your teammates can have that additional context as well. But instructions are essentially a context file where the LLM knows that it exists, and it can easily pull context from that file, as opposed to exploring your code base and discovering that again. It's easier if just important information is just in the context file, instructions, cursor rules, agents MD, Claude MD, you get it. It's important to have that in there so your LLMs don't have to rediscover important information. You can have information like tech stacks in there, like what languages, what frameworks. You could be enforcing coding standards in there, or even behavioral preferences. So yeah, it's just good to be aware of. If you're not using these, you should be using these. So, depending on what you're using, just Google or try to look up, XY instructions or XY cursor rules. There's someone else out there, or maybe there's like official kind of context files out there for you to discover and make it even easier. Moving on to agent skills. This is another newer thing that's gaining traction and popularity recently. And pretty sure it was popularized by Anthropic. And I really feel like Anthropic is leading the way. They popularized the Claude Code, the CLI tool. Not saying it was the first to ever exist, but they definitely popularized it, and everyone copied after that. They introduced skills. So, I really feel like Anthropic is leading the way, and they're pretty thoughtful about how they do things. So the recent drama about OpenCode and other agents leveraging the Anthropic Pro and Max plans is interesting. We're not going to touch on it here. I feel like it's been touched on already. But yeah, interesting to see how Anthropic responds to that. But unlike the instructions, Claude MD, cursor rules, this is actually an open standard. So that's really nice that all these different tools can follow this one standard to be able to integrate different sets of skills. And like it says here, agent skills are folders of instructions, scripts, and resources that agents can discover and use to do things more accurately and efficiently. And I really love this analogy from Alex Albert, who's responsible for Claude Relations at Anthropic. But he says, at a high level, the best analogy I've heard for skills is something like Neo learning Kung Fu in seconds in the Matrix. And we're loading in specialized knowledge to our general agents at runtime. And I really love this analogy. But another way that I think of this is that when you give an agent access to a set of skills, it almost functions like a library where an agent can pull a skill off the shelf when it's relevant for the task that it's working on. So it could do this automatically, or you could instruct it to invoke that specific skill if you know you want that skill. So really it's really important to be aware of this, and I think it could really increase the correctness, or the quality rather, of the output of the task that you're given it. And it's really kind of along the lines of improving the prompt. It could be prompt engineering or even context engineering, if you will. But what they've discovered is that the models are very capable, but like it says here, often don't have the context they need to do real work reliably. And so skills solve this by giving agents access to procedural knowledge and, specific context that can load in on demand. So I've really been seeing success with this. For instance, there's a front-end design skill from Anthropic that I've been using for, designing parts of a web application, the front end of a web application. So yeah, I've been seeing success there, and it's great that it's an open standard. Again, unlike the, context file for the instructions, cursor rules, Claude.md. So yeah, something to be aware of. And yeah, I'm curious if you're seeing success with this. What skills are you using, or where you're seeing success? So yeah, definitely curious. Have you ever been on the go and you come up with an idea and you think it'd be great to give that task to your agent so it can work on it asynchronously while you're out and about and away from your computer? So Claude has an implementation of this, and I believe Cursor has something similar as well. But you can give Claude access to whatever repository you're working with initially, and also give it network access as well, which also helps, search the web if it needs to pull in more context. But essentially, you can initiate this remote session, and essentially what it does is it, on some server somewhere, it clones down your repository and then just gets to work and tries to complete your task. So here I have this open source repository. It's some LaTeX-based cheat sheets for productivity tools and key bindings, so you can work around your operating system more quickly using your keyboard and not relying on your mouse so much. So anyways, just as an example, let's just say make a new cheat sheet for, Cursor, just as an example. So we'll fire that off. So fast forwarding a little bit, we can see that it cloned the repository, explored the code base, read some files, and created a to-do list to start executing. So pretty cool. But really what I wanted to show you is that even from your phone, you can create a PR just with the click of a button. But if you have the Claude desktop app as well, you can also select that same conversation. And I'm going to hide myself here for a second, but you can create the PR, but you can also click this to open the conversation in Claude Code in your command line interface in your terminal, which I think is pretty awesome. So you can just go into your directory, paste that teleport command, and you'll continue that conversation right from your terminal. And I think that's pretty sick. All right, we're going to wrap things up. We've touched on a few topics, but I wanted to end with what my workflow is as of January 2026, kind of the ingredients of how I optimize for quality outputs and using agents efficiently and effectively. So the first is using plan mode. I think especially if you're building a larger feature, toggling your agent, whatever you use, Cursor, Claude Code, Copilot, toggling it into plan mode and working with the agent to come up with a plan first, and then approving that plan. Make sure you read the plan. That's a great first step into creating a good prompt for the agent to work on. And second is Git work trees. And this is actually even useful outside of agents. Like have you ever been working on a project, you have your own changes that you haven't staged or stashed yet, and you want to review maybe a different branch that a colleague created? Well, you can create a Git work tree, which is essentially just a different directory with a different Git branch checked out. And yeah, it's a great way for you to run multiple agents in different directories working on different tasks. And this is so you don't have multiple agents working in the same directory and then they're getting confused because they're making changes to the same files. So definitely recommend using Git work trees. You can literally just prompt the agent, use a Git work tree to implement these changes in the plan mode, and it'll do it. The third thing that I've really loved doing recently is asking it to generate different perspectives on a feature. And I actually got this from Andre Karpathy, where in this particular tweet, he says, don't think of LLMs as entities, but as simulators. And when you're exploring a topic, don't ask, what do you think about XYZ? Because there is no you. Instead, what would be a good group of people to explore this? And what would they say? And a lot of times I'll say, incorporate that into your planning. And he says, this is because the LLM can simulate many perspectives but it hasn't thought about XYZ for a while, and over time and formed its own opinions in the way we're used to. So really been loving this for building out features. You're working on a web application and you prompt it with this prompt, then maybe it'll consider perspectives from product manager, UX, data engineer, DevOps, which is really useful in planning and executing of a task because it's considering all those different perspectives. So really been loving doing this recently, and I really think it's increased the quality of the output of the agents. So yeah, highly recommend. We already touched on it, but skills pay the bills. So a couple I've been using recently: front-end design from Anthropic. There's PR reviews. There's Git skills. Skills are really endless. You should, if you're working on a specific project, specific language, specific framework, get out there, search for skills for those specific tools, and it really should increase the quality of the output as well. Code reviews we touched on as well, but again, ultimately going to increase the quality of the output. And here you could even use different models as well. Say you generated your code with Opus, and maybe you use Sonnet to review your code, or maybe you use both. Maybe you use an OpenAI model, you use Gemini, whatever. Is just kind of that diversity of perspectives to look for, different ways to critique your code. So yeah, that's definitely been useful. And lastly, APIs, MCP or CLI tools. If you're using, Atlassian, Basecamp, Asana, or even, error or exception tools like Sentry, you can install the plugins or CLI tools, and just whatever you have access to in Bash, your agent can have access to as well. So it's just another way to allow an agent to easily pull in more context, to reduce that friction. Let's not copy paste things into the agent. Obviously you still can, but really just trying to reduce that friction and get that context in the agent as easily as possible. And one last thing I didn't mention on this slide, but I've been pasting images into Claude Code as well, which essentially just pastes the path to the file so Claude can discover that, read that image file, and it kind of gives it just a different angle. It gives it better context in terms of what it's producing or what you want it to see. So yeah, that's another kind of tip or trick that I've been using as well. So anyways, wanted to share kind of my workflow and the ingredients, if you will, that I'm working with working with agents day to day. And I've been seeing a lot more success. If you guys have any other tips or tricks, feel free to drop them in the comments below, because I definitely want to learn what other people are doing and what you're seeing success with. So anyways, yeah, thanks for sticking around. And yeah, hopefully I'll drop another video soon if things change. So, we'll do these throughout the year, and hopefully we'll all learn together and have fun and learn to use agents more effectively. I'll see you in the next video. Peace.